Hi, Bother Brigade. Here's what's bothering me today. That title is not a lie. It's not a gotcha or there's some kind of trick or a belated April Fool's joke or anything like that. It's sadly, unfortunately true. So yeah, today is story time. We're going to learn the story of how I nearly accidentally almost became a mercenary. So first, let's start at the beginning, the real beginning. When I was 13, I joined the Royal Canadian Air Cadets, and they let you do a lot of really cool stuff if you're lucky, which I was. Like a lot of really cool stuff. This is in the hopes of encouraging you to join the Canadian Armed Forces, though it's not a requirement at all. So while I didn't go into the military, a lot of my squadron mates and friends that I had made at various cadet summer camps did. I'm actually still in touch with most of them to this day, and some are still really good friends of mine. And some of these friends who did end up joining the military, they served their time and then they left the military and became private military contractors or private security contractors or security consultants. There's various terms for the same thing, which is basically a hired gun or mercenary. Now, the Air Cadets inspired me to pursue aircraft maintenance, but the economy crashed in 2008, and even by 2011, work was still pretty sparse compared to usual. I was underemployed or straight up unemployed for a few years, which wasn't very fun. And so it was at this point in my life that a former cadet friend encouraged me to join him providing security on cargo/container ships. But that's not the real story here. Now, I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't interested in being able to travel and be paid a large sum of cash to hold a gun on a ship. But again, I'm not actually ex-military unlike he was, and it just kind of felt wrong and inappropriate to me. So months go by, jobs come and go, eventually I'm unemployed again, fun. And so I'm looking for a job and I see an opportunity that on the surface seems pretty great. I would be serving as a French translator for a company that had potential postings in Mali, Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, and Niger. Great money, great job, relevant skill set, etc., etc., etc. I quickly got an interview, it seemed to be going pretty well, and it seems like I'd be a good fit since, I spoke French, I had done a lot of bush weekends and survival weekends, especially with the cadets. I had at least some familiarity with, rough living as such. Didn't really have anything tying me down, so it wasn't like, oh, I got a house and a mortgage, so, I was pretty free to just pick up stakes and go somewhere for several months to a year or more, right? And it seemed like a good fit, and so the process was set in motion. I started telling people, including the aforementioned friend. And he immediately responded to me with, dude, I thought you were against PMC work. And I was very concerned, thinking, wait, what? Please explain. Turns out this company blurs the line between their civilian contractors and security contractors. My friend gave me the lowdown on what kind of questions I should ask to kind of suss out this company and find out what would actually be involved. And I was told that any phrase or sentence that had the words change and operation in it was an extremely big red flag. Since the company interviewers had said, oh, if you ever have any questions, please reach out to us. So of course I did. So with the help of my former military / ongoing at the time private military contractor friend, I had written a bunch of questions that I was going to ask them to try and suss out the situation. Turns out that this position would have actually been subcontracting for a mining company. That's red flag number one. I then asked them what kind of challenges translators typically face in this position, and also if there were any other job requirements that may be required of me or be useful in such a situation. One of the interviewers wrote back to me, you need to be adaptable, as the job may change due to operational needs. And there it was, the biggest possible red flag. To translate that, it means they planned on only using me as a translator / interpreter, but they planned on sending me into situations where it likely meant I would have had to pick up a gun and wear a bulletproof vest. Now, if this sounds like a giant leap and that I'm just, wildly being hyperbolic here, I'd like to remind people that a Canadian geologist and company executive was kidnapped and killed in Burkina Faso in January of 2019. And later that same year, 37 civilians would be killed in an attack on a Canadian mining corporation's convoy in the same country. So yeah, shout out to my friend for stopping me from accidentally going down a path of being a gun for hire in the service of neocolonialism in West Africa? We all need friends like this in our lives, so I hope you have one. And so that's the story of how I nearly went down that path, kind of unwittingly. And this also isn't me trying to suggest that, oh, it could have been me there in Burkina Faso, because that was in 2019. When this was happening in my life was about 2013 or like early 2014 when the process was first set in motion. But I think this also touches on a wider story that doesn't get talked about nearly enough, which is the insidious and completely covert nature of Canadian neocolonialism in West Africa. Now that I am much more aware, now than I was in like my early 20s back at this point, it should have been obvious to me from the beginning that any job posting that has you in West Africa, especially Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, or Cote d'Ivoire, is pretty much asking to have some level of danger pay, because you're going to be enabling the worst people, exploiting some of the poorest people on the planet for monetary gain of rich people who don't even know or care who you are. Attacks on Canadian-owned mines are not uncommon throughout West Africa, and perhaps people don't know this, but Canada is one of the biggest mining operators in the world. We all rightfully dunk on Elon Musk and his apartheid emerald father, but maybe we should also expand that to include Canada, which is presenting itself to the world as, oh, we're so nice, we're so peaceful, we believe in immigration and tolerance and multiculturalism. Please pay no mind to our absolute plundering of West Africa and Latin America. And again, in the most classic waspy Canadian fashion, I nearly participated in that, because they kind of just try and slide it in there. They kind of force you to go into a situation where you may end up having to pick up a gun and wear a bulletproof vest as a translator, or as a geologist, or as a surveyor, or, you know, you're the guy who's setting up the electricity for the mining camp and its electric fence. Canada really loves to blur the lines between civilian and private security contractors, to the point that in many cases it just goes completely unreported, and they will misrepresent people as civilian casualties. Now, crucially, I'm not saying that's what happened in the aforementioned stories in Burkina Faso. Those details still seem to be kind of sparse at the moment, which is curious, but that's all I'm going to say about that. A lot of people are unaware that we had private security contractors in Afghanistan on top of our soldiers. So yeah, that was just something I wanted people to become more aware of. Not just my story and how I nearly went down a very dark and awful path, and objectively only about a decade or so ago, but also wanted to point out that Canada is very much a villain on the world stage, but people here in this country don't know about it, and most people outside of this country won't know about it either. And that's a problem, and we should be more cognizant of this and call it out when we see it, and fight against Canadian neocolonialism in West Africa and Latin America. All this talk of, we're so welcoming and friendly and multicultural, all while we are plundering and murdering our way through, the Amazon and the Andes and West Africa. It needs to stop, and more people need to be aware of it. And the fact that many of us aren't is definitely what's bothering me today.